The decisive Battle for Helena took place on July 4th, 1863. Confederate forces were hoping to relieve pressure on besieged Vicksburg. Ironically, that city would surrender on the same day as the attack. On the morning of July 3rd, General Theophilus Holmes called an officers' meeting at the Allen Polk farmhouse, 5 miles west of Helena. Leaders of the gathering Confederate Army listened as Holmes outlined his plan of attack. Brigadier General James Fagan would attack Helena from the south and along the Little Rock Road. His target would be the Federal Battery D, located on Hindman Hill. Major General Sterling Price would attack from the west and along the Spring Creek Road. The target of his division would be Battery C on Graveyard Hill. Brigadier General John S. Marmaduke's Cavalry Division was ordered to capture Battery A atop Ryder Hill. Brigadier General Marsh Walker would push down the Sterling Road, supporting Marmaduke, and capture Helena. All 3 columns would attack at daybreak. Holmes stressed daybreak. That one part of the plan would be its undoing, though. Every general at the meeting interpreted daybreak to mean something different. This would prove disastrous. Meanwhile, in Helena, Major General Benjamin Prentiss had his small army ready for the attack he knew was coming. The 33rd Missouri had been trained as artillery and manned the guns of Fort Curtis and the 4 well-defended batteries located along the hills above town. His other infantry manned rifle pits, and the cavalry under Colonel Powell Clayton covered the northern approach to town. The ever-vigilant Prentiss and his competent Brigadier General Frederick Solomon had their men up and in position by 3 a.m. every morning. They had gotten word of a massing rebel force. There was also the extra protection of the U.S. gunboat Tyler, lying at anchor in the Mississippi River. At the first appearance of daylight, General Fagan set his men in motion. Colonel William Brooks and his 34th Arkansas, along with several companies of independent cavalry, were detached along the lower Little Rock Road. Brooks drew first blood when he routed a small Union patrol from the 28th Wisconsin, killing 3 and capturing 6. They then halted at the Clements house and waited. Their job was to divert attention while the rest of the brigade attacked Battery D. The other 3 regiments of the brigade under Fagan were having a hard time moving along the ridge in the upper Little Rock Road. Union soldiers had downed trees and set up obstacles that slowed the rebels down. General Fagan realized his artillery would be no help, so he sent them to join Brooks. It was now 4:05 a.m. Hawthorne's Arkansas infantry was deployed along the Little Rock Road. The 37th Arkansas under Colonel Bell was ordered to the left, and the 35th Arkansas under Colonel King was sent to the right. With his men deployed in this fashion, General Fagan ordered the attack. With a rebel yell, the men advanced and were immediately hit by fire from the Union trenches. One by one, those trenches fell, though, as defenders were killed or retreated backward toward the battery. The lack of artillery support was beginning to tell, though. Guns from Battery C had joined with B to blast holes into the attacking regiments. Fagan's attack began to stall. Where was the rest of the army? It was almost 7 a.m. Along the lower Little Rock Road, Colonel Brooks and his command had been joined by Fagan's artillery. Brooks had stopped at the site of a Union defensive line with artillery and infantry belonging to the 2nd Arkansas of African descent. He was also receiving fire from the gunboat Tyler. His cavalry raided a large freedmen's camp located near the Federal lines. Screams could be heard from women and children living in the camp as the horsemen rode through. Colonel Brooks did manage to get his artillery somewhat involved finally, but well-aimed shots by the Tyler drove them away. He could only remain where he was and have his men take shots at the well-defended Union lines. Suddenly, the spirits of Fagan's men were lifted as they heard firing from Battery C. General Price had finally attacked. Encouraged, General Fagan ordered his men forward. With a shout, they took the 5th and last line of trenches. Only the fort atop Battery D remained, but his men were exhausted. They had been fighting for 3 hours on that hot July morning. The defenders of Battery D under Captain John Hudson were also exhausted. Lieutenant Adam Smith of the 33rd Missouri lay mortally wounded. Although they were being assisted by portions of the 33rd Iowa and 43rd Indiana, there was a growing alarm about Battery C. General Price's division had driven the Federals off the hill and were advancing into Helena. The heavy guns of Fort Curtis and the gunboat Tyler were decimating them, though. Because of that, General Holmes made a decision to retreat. Unfortunately for the rebels, many of his men were in no position to do just that. When the attack stalled, General Fagan received word to fall back. As his men began to withdraw, they were faced with the same fate as their comrades who had attacked Battery C: to flee under fire or give up. For hundreds of men in the gullies and ditches surrounding Battery D, the decision was to give up. With victory in sight, Union soldiers began to advance toward the rebels. It was at this point that Lieutenant Joseph Brooks of the 33rd Missouri was killed while leading his company. Lieutenant Colonel Cyrus Mackey of the 33rd Iowa stated his regiment charged and captured several hundred prisoners and 2 stands of colors. Most of the 37th Arkansas under Colonel Bell were trapped in a deep ravine below Battery D when the order to withdraw was given. Some of the regiment under Major Blacknell were able to pull back, but most couldn't. Bell was severely wounded in the knee, and Lieutenant Colonel J.C. Johnson now assumed command of what was left. At this point, Captain Hudson of the 33rd Missouri, with cannons pointed at their position, demanded the surrender of the 37th. Lieutenant Colonel Johnson formally surrendered his colors, and nearly 200 men laid down their arms. The battle for Helena was over. According to records, General Fagan's brigade suffered the following casualties: 47 killed, 115 wounded, and 273 captured. Union casualties for Battery D and the lower Little Rock Road fights are not complete because Federal regiments were divided and fought in several different parts of the battle. Part 2 will cover the fight for Battery C. See you next month.